Hey everyone, this is Neil Percy. I'm going to show you what I believe is fundamentally like the most important thing for marketers right now. I think there's so much data out there. As digital marketers, we have the most data, which is also a problem, right? So because we report on so many things and just throw data in there, and hopefully something happens, some magic happens, and unfortunately it doesn't. So what I've been talking about on just through my networks is this thing around called a measurement framework. And I'm going to give you just a quick snapshot. I want to limit this to like 10 minutes max if I can. And then we can let the questions run from there. I'm going to quickly share my screen. All right. So what we have here is what I like to call the measurement framework. And what it does, the purpose of it is, for one, to focus on the metrics that matter. That's critical, but the metrics that matter across the buying funnel, from awareness to consideration to acquisition and through to advocacy. There are certain outcomes needed at different levels, and it's also important for marketing managers, C-suite, to understand what those are and what they're working towards, because that really answers the so what, or at least gets you closer to the so what. The second piece is the silos that have been created unintentionally, I always say, because no one wants to create these silos. It was never done on purpose. But you have paid media, owned media, and earned media. All three of these have their silos. So you have the paid media team or the agency running their campaigns. You have owned media, the website, any form of community management on social platforms. And then you have the earned media, which could be the PR agency, also a bit of community management in there. But all three have created their silos, and naturally then there's metrics that fall into that and they get isolated from the others. So what you have is a solution that breaks them down with key impact outcomes. So at awareness, you have salience, you have share of voice, and then the specific metrics. And another key point is that there's always a counter metric. The counter metric keeps everything honest. So an awareness, typical awareness campaign, you're after reach. How many eyeballs have you actually reached? So that's great. And say that number is 1 million. But what about frequency? Have they actually seen that ad or that campaign at least 4 or 5 times? And what's the video duration? Like that, that could be really low in terms of video duration or watch time, which doesn't matter how many people you've reached. If video duration was very low, then the campaign wouldn't have done that well. So, brands are competing for attention, and that's critical to ensure that the brand stays in the person's mind, which then speaks to salience. Then you have another one called earned impressions, another key metric, and that really drives conversation, or conversation drives the earned impressions, which then speaks to share of voice. So is the conversation, is your campaign actually driving conversation online? What does that look like in terms of your competitors? Critical piece of information there. All right, then we have, let's quickly go into channel, campaign, and audience. So you can see here I've got maturity levels for each one. So channel is the easiest to report on. Then you have campaign, and then audience. Now the success of this is determined by your taxonomy. And I always go on about, I teach it around how important taxonomy is. It's like the foundation. And the right taxonomy that you have will determine, or if it's poor, it will determine the other side. You won't be able to report on campaign and audience that effectively. So taxonomy is critical. Audience, I always say there's two pieces to reporting. There's the audience piece, and then there's the creative. And how you report on that is critical. The creative piece sits outside of this. It will be a separate report, but audience is critical at this level. Okay, then we move on to consideration. Key metric here, or key outcome rather, is new engaged users. You want to be able to get new engaged users on your platforms, on your websites, that is critical through the channel, campaign, and audience. So I spoke about earned impressions there, right? So if you're driving earned impressions at awareness piece, you want to start looking at brand search impressions. So, if that number of brand search impressions is going up, then that's an indicator of a strong awareness campaign, and that'll be driven by salience, share voice. And then obviously to look at new engaged users, you also need to look at non-brand search sessions. So that's a bit of an SEO play there. So how well are you doing to attract users, new users, to your site that maybe haven't even considered you? So they're in consideration phase, and now because they're on your site, there's a potential sale waiting to happen. Here's an interesting metric: click-through rate. Actually really important, and from what I've learned is that click-through rate is super critical because you start to understand intent. But here's the counter metric: session duration. And this is where silos can come in terms of the reporting and the frustrations. So your team or your agency could be reporting on a very high click-through rate and saying, giving themselves high fives. But what about the session duration? Like, what are they actually doing on the site? Are they staying? Are they hanging around? Are they downloading white papers? Are they engaging on your site? That's the real value of the click-through rate. So there's a key piece. Then we move on to acquisition, where we look at revenue, driving revenue now, and ultimately we want to look at return on marketing investment. Now, a critical piece here as well, and again, it comes down to taxonomy, is that you actually want to be tracking the amount of money you're spending at each stage. So how much you're investing into awareness, how much you're investing into consideration, and how much you're investing in acquisition, and likewise for advocacy. Now, this is critical because it starts obviously getting to a point where they're actually buying, obviously, and converting from lead into sale. You'll see that I don't have earned media here because it's obviously quite difficult, or even it's earned media doesn't really play in the acquisition space. I think owned media and paid media is where you're going to drive the sale, or at least the lead, and then ultimately the sale. Again, tracking and attribution at this point is critical, which ultimately falls across everything. So attribution is not just last click, it's from top of the funnel through to bottom of the funnel. Super complex, but you'll see where I land with this and the purpose, the additional value. When you start getting this framework right, I'll land on that piece. So just give me a minute or two before I get there. Then at advocacy, we have key outcomes there: is sentiment and engagement. Key one here is reviews. That's obvious because that is an indicator of advocacy. But content engagement is one that will I think create a bit of a debate, because the share, does it really mean that you're in consideration phase? And a lot of the time it gets reported there. But actually, it's just to say that the person's a brand advocate. They're not interested in buying just yet. I could be an Apple fan and I could like their content, or I could be a Nike fan. I could like their content. It doesn't mean to say that I'm interested in buying right now. It just means to say that I'm a fan of that. So brand love, advocacy is where content engagement should be reported on. Critical. And then of course you have net promoter score. Again, potentially some people have varied opinions on net promoter score, but if done right, I believe it's a really important metric to stay on top of. All right, and then we have attribution. I'm not going to get into attribution because that's a whole conversation in itself, but just know that ultimately where you want to get to is attribute awareness all the way, any awareness campaigns all the way to a sale. That's attribution. Where I wanted to get to was two key metrics here for ultimately for a business, which is to grow market share. And then a counter metric is profitability, because you could grow market share, but actually not be that profitable. So again, two metrics, counter metrics together working hand in hand to drive growth. So where I want to land this is that why this is so critical, because people will say, well, this is just, this is a report. And obviously from here, you go into data visualization. You can do that in Power BI, maybe Data Studio, but it's probably a little bit weak in that front. But Power BI, Looker, Tableau, where you're getting here, what you're doing here is you're building, and you have to centralize all this data, right, to get to this point, to be able to visualize this data and the metrics that matter. But what you're doing is you're actually building your engine. And in time, that's where the data science comes in, because if you can see if earned impression goes up, what is the impact on brand search impressions? What is the value of that metric? Surely brand search impressions is higher value than, say, an earned impression, but it is an indicator or a driver to grow brand search, as an example. That's where the smart data scientists can come in, and that's critical to be able to build this engine, that knowledge, to be able to grow your business. That's the power of this framework. Now, this is not a framework that's cut and dry, and it's the only metrics that we look at. Obviously, every business has its nuanced metrics that they would want to focus on, but this is a good starting point for marketers to start embedding into the business and at least start having the conversation. Cool. That was a very quick high-level view of this reporting framework that I talk about and the metrics that matter. Hopefully it makes sense. And please give me a shout if you have any questions.